In this episode of Hot Hardware's 2.5 Geeks, Intel is ready to talk GPUs, monster Intel CPUs, lots of AMD news and reviews, again. ThinkPad gets extreme, HP always connected, and Samsung is tabbing out. Next. Welcome back to another episode of Hot Hardware's 2.5 Geeks, the show where we give you tech news before you gobble till you wobble. That's our gig here. You know, we got to feed the brain as well as the belly this holiday thankful season. So welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Altavilla, and with me, as always, Marco Chiappetta and Chris Getting of the illustrious Hot Hardware gang. Gentlemen, you get your honeydews done at this point?
Oh God, no. My house looks like a bomb went off.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. Chris, you on the short list, the naughty and the nice list? What?
I think I'm in good shape because Brittany's family's in town, so I had to do a lot of cleaning getting into that, and I think I pulled it off, so not too bad.
Good. Yeah, no, I've been busy as heck, way too busy, and so I've been shirking my duties, and it's guaranteed that I will pay later. That's just the way it works. It's either pay me now or pay me later. So I get the later tab probably. Shannon is barking something in the chat. He's saying someone kicked the server. I think Marco broke it trying to make Amiga emulators. I don't know what he was referring to there, but we're streaming now, Shannon. Maybe you were looking at the splash screen. We do tee it up just a few minutes before we kick off. But Hot Hardware's servers look like they're snappy as ever under the holiday stress and strain. So I think we're good.
That's all that matters.
That's it. Well, I don't know. It's not all that matters, but it's close to it for now anyways. So, yeah, you guys, you ready to dive in, or you want to just, complain a little bit more about how overworked and underpaid we are, or what?
Let's get this rolling, because I want to go eat a giant meal and get the belly stretched out and prepared for tomorrow.
All right, you want to sport eat. Excellent. Okay, well that's important. You gotta limber up even before you digest, I suppose. Hey, so let's dive in then. Let's talk about the headlines. We got lots going on, lots of things in Q4, always churning out these days. Tis the season for us in tech for sure. Certainly, whether you're Black Friday crazy coming up this week or Cyber Monday maniacal. And of course, as we run into Q4, all the different launches ramping into CES in Las Vegas in January. So lots of things going on, and everybody's in the OEM space, in the tech OEM space, is firing on all cylinders, it seems. And Intel is one of those people, which we will get to in the show. We're gonna sort of leave this for somewhere in the middle. We might throw it in randomly, but they have a few things to share with you relative to GPUs. We'll get to that shortly. But before we do, let's talk about something that they can talk fully about now, and that Marco actually kicked the tires on. Intel's Core i9 9980XE CPU supercharged many-core Skylake X 18-core beast. Is that what this thing is? And what the heck would you do with a chip like that, Marco?
It is an 18-core beast. So a few weeks back, we showed everybody the Core i9 9900K, the first 9th gen Intel processor. That was based on the Coffee Lake refresh, and that is a brand new chip. Existing Coffee Lake architecture with some tweaks for Meltdown and Spectre exploits, I should say. These the 9th gen Core X, they're new in terms of branding, but not completely new in terms of the hardware. So we got to look at the flagship, the Core i9 9980XE, 18-core, 36 threads with hyperthreading. So, monstrous desktop chip. It's based on Skylake X, though, it's basically the exact same core as the 7980XE. But, over time, Intel's manufacturing process, the 14 nanometer process, has kind of matured. They give it some new plus names. So manufacturing process has matured. They've also outfitted this new lineup with solder thermal interface material instead of the paste that was used on the 7th gen. The solder TIM is more efficient at getting heat out of the actual die and into the heat spreader so that it can get into your heatsink faster, keep temperatures down. They also tweaked the power profile and the turbo speeds. So essentially what the 9980XE is a higher clocked 7980XE that should run at lower temperatures. If you go look at the numbers and you look through the testing, that's basically exactly what happens. It's easily the fastest Intel many-core processor that they've released to date. Multi-threaded workloads, it beats all of the previous gen Intel processors. And what's interesting is because of the much higher turbo clocks, you have really good single-thread performance. So Skylake X IPC and single-thread performance, not as good as Coffee Lake, as the newer Coffee Lake cores. But because this chip can go so high, up to 4.4 gigahertz, I think up to 4.5 with Turbo Boost 3 with some workloads, you get a really strong single-thread. So in terms of the many-core experience, if I could use that word, it's a monster. So you have awesome multi-thread, really good single thread. None of the weirdness that you have with a Threadripper WX series, because memory is attached locally. There's no like weird latency issues with memory and having to contend with threads being on a compute die that doesn't have memory attached. So it really just works, and killer performance. The problem is, or I mean, depending on how deep your pockets are, almost $2,000 out of the gate. 1979 MSRP for this guy.
Wow, that's like seriously used car price territory. To equate it to
exactly.
Yeah. Wow, interesting chip. I would love to have all those cores and the single threaded IPC advantage of Intel. Certainly they're single threaded, they're generally their IPC throughput is better than AMD core for core. The price is certainly a double take. You gotta really have to justify that. But what's the use case for something like this beyond just the obvious stuff where you can load up 10 million things? What do you think their target market is? I mean, you can load this thing down with lots of different applications. Who's going to justify? I guess what I'm asking is, who's going to justify this price point most?
The most, a few groups. So anybody that does crazy megatasking, multitasking, video editing. If you live and die, if your time is valuable and you're editing video, working with huge files, you can literally save minutes, maybe hours over the course of your week, and that's time you can use for something else. So you can justify the cost if you're going to whack all those cores. Any kind of content creator, also anybody with a tiny wee that needs to have compensate for something, they're going to love something like this.
Excellent, yeah, of course.
So it's the same as any high-end processor. There's always really strong value and not too much lower performance for significantly lower cost. But if you want the best of the best multi-core desktop chip from Intel, that's it. It's the 9980XE, and it's actually debuting at $20 less than the 7980XE. So not a total loss.
Yeah,
put that in the bank.
So one thing though that go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go for it.
So one thing where. So technically, it's very similar to the 7980XE. For my particular 7980XE wasn't a great overclocker. The 9980XE was nuts. So I tend to be really conservative when I'm overclocking doing stuff, because I wanted to give readers like a worst case scenario. If we pulled it off, you should be able to do it, because we're not doing anything exotic, anything crazy.
Yep.
The 9980XE with just a tower type air cooler, I hit an all core turbo of 4.5 gigahertz. So all cores all the time, 4.5 gigahertz. And that results in some big performance gains. Just to give you an example, Cinebench stock, the 9980XE does 3799 Cinebench points. Okay, that's behind the Threadripper 2970 WX. Overclocked, I got 4408 which puts it in front of the 24-core Threadripper. So, there's lots of performance there. If you go nuts with the cooling and you're an enthusiast and you want to tweak and turn the dials, you can get some monster performance out of this thing.
4.5 gigahertz across 18 cores, 36 threads. Yeah, I would eat that up. I mean, we do a lot of heavy duty multitasking here, and usually it's running Photoshop, running a video render at the same time. It certainly screams pro streamer, right? So you're gaming, you're streaming, you're capturing and encoding all at the same time. And then of course, content creation professional, somebody that is rendering multi-threaded in the applications themselves. Yeah, that is definitely a beast. You brought in AMD in the discussion there, the 24-core chip. What's MSRP on the 2970X or WX these days?
So it's cheaper. So 29. Let me double check exactly, because I think I have the 2990s price in my head. But so 2970WX is only 1300. So it's significantly cheaper. And now if you have a workload that will use all the threads efficiently, the 2970WX is going to be faster most of the time. But you have to contend with the lower IPC and those issues where workloads might spill onto the compute dies. Now, AMD is working on software tricks to kind of mitigate that. But in our review, it wasn't perfect just yet. So for now, like if you want a killer experience with a many-core CPU, overall, the experience is arguably better with one of these Intel chips, because you don't have to contend with all that other stuff. Yeah, but you pay for it. I mean, it's pricier. Now, if you want to back up a little more, so technically I'm comparing the Core i9 to a Threadripper WX, which is technically a workstation processor. That really should be compared to a Xeon. The fastest Threadripper desktop chip is the 2950X. And obviously with 2 more cores and higher clocks, the Core i9 is faster, but it's double the price.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, certainly AMD is giving serious chase these days, and perhaps even if they weren't in the mix, we wouldn't see as high a core count perhaps from Intel. I don't know, but it is an interesting dynamic. I wonder if we looked at, it'd be interesting to look at market share numbers in just the high core count CPUs, and I don't know if you can cull that anywhere easily, but it would be interesting to profile that to see how this shakes out, because really when you think about the cost performance trade-off between the two, there's certainly some serious merit to both platforms depending on your use case. And I think it would be interesting to learn where these are big expensive chips. The average gamer enthusiast isn't dropping one of these chips in there. They're just not. It costs an entire system plus in some cases, right? So it would just be interesting to see where the market share goes. What are your theories on this, Chris? You're actually in the IT space, and you see all sorts of different from servers to workstations use cases. Right.
I mean, it's definitely targeted much more at the number crunchers than the gamers. But I just want to follow on what Shannon said in the chat, that the 9980XE is a badass chip, albeit not necessarily a gaming chip, though some will try. And I will say, from using the 7980XE in the Alienware system I had a few months ago, it could game like no problem, especially at higher resolutions, which if you have an extreme chip like this, you probably also have budget for high resolution monitors where your CPU load isn't going to matter so much because you're going to be GPU bound, presumably. Right. So if that's your case, it's not really going to matter. So if you want to do all your content creation and game, it's not going to slow you down for that by any real tangible amount. So no problems there, but definitely a chip that is better suited for anyone who's doing large amounts of content creation, complex video renders, and wants to do other stuff at the same time. If you're strictly gaming, or even gaming and streaming and that's about it, I still think you're better off with something like the 9900K, because you're still not going to be hitting that many threads with just a gaming and streaming workload.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense.
To answer, well, to try to give you some insight on the share question, I was looking at the Steam hardware survey. You can't break it down by thread count. You can only break it down by clocks. But overall, 85% of gamers on Intel and 15 on AMD. So obviously many more Core i9s most likely versus Threadrippers. And interestingly, from June to October, very little change. Mostly, Intel actually gained share. So that's interesting stuff.
I mean, if Intel can sell it at their price point of $2,000, more power to them. But I mean, with Threadripper coming in at the pricing it's coming at, under $1,000 for what's $2,950 and $1,300 for a $2,970, it's really hard as a system builder who knows what you're looking at to see that price gap and really justify it, unless you are hard Team Blue.
I was having a conversation with some folks. Intel prices the chips versus their chips, whereas AMD is trying to take a competitive position. Intel looks at where the CPU fits in their stack, and that's where the price lands. They don't really care what the competition's doing yet.
Yeah. They've been in that mode for a while. They can take that approach. Historically, I've been able to take that approach. I think now they need to perhaps change that focus a little bit. I mean, they've got some serious competition, and certainly there's many of folks in the YouTube community that would wave the AMD flag at this point for the Ryzen products. So I had a theory when we were sort of finishing up the conversation on this here, and I wanted to sort of toss this out there. I wonder how much of that gestation period, or I guess that Steam survey number that you saw is gestation period. So by that I mean people are on an Intel platform. Ryzen has been introduced, and then certainly Threadripper on the many core side. Do you think that it's really just, hey, it has, AMD's seriously competitive solutions haven't been long enough in market yet to make that kind of a dent because people are still aging out of their older Intel platform or their previous gen or what have you?
I don't know, man. When Ryzen first launched, people were chomping at the bit and excited for an alternative. Obviously, AMD gained share since Ryzen has launched, but in the last 6 months, it looks like things haven't budged, at least with Steam gamers. I was just looking at the Steam survey quickly to see if there was data there.
Right. And consider too, I mean, like I'm still on a 6700K here. And it's fine for gaming. I would like more cores for a lot of the content creation stuff I do, but that's another discussion. There's people who still have 4th gen Intel chips that are more than happy with their gaming performance. So I think for the gaming demand, I mean, GPUs are still the much bigger factor in that. So I don't think people are necessarily upgrading their CPUs just for better gaming performance, like we'd see picking up the new NVIDIA or AMD cards. So there's that too. You also have a big Intel market share still coming from laptop users, where AMD still hasn't really gotten their way back in on the laptop side as much. So there is a lot of room to grow there as well.
Yeah. Francois has some interesting comments in the chat. Mark, I don't know if you want to digest that. I tend to agree with them, but those are interesting observations, and I think they're all right. And I also think there's also a component in the Steam community of mobile gamers where folks are on laptops, what have you. And again, the migrations there are slower as well over multiple years. What do you think about Francois' comment?
When you buy an Intel processor, but let me see. Yeah, I mean, so Francois really speaks from a developer, really advanced user perspective, and Intel just has the resources to have more tools and stuff available for people like that. So yeah, he's absolutely right in that regard, of course.
Yeah. Homie John Tech, I don't know if we're going to acknowledge this guy. He looks like he might be trolling. Who knows? but either that or he's throwing out some pretty interesting song lyrics. I ain't saying she's a gold digger. Anyways, I think he might have been talking about Freckles there, who was barking. She was digging something in the background there, buddy. I don't know if
Always
she's digging
after
for
a treat.
gold. If she's digging for gold, then let her keep digging, right?
I'll take it.
So yeah. So let's move on to something else Intel, and then we'll transition out of that to a little bit of AMD after that. So let's stay on the Intel bead and talk about something we John, if you can bump to the end of the list, we're gonna go all the way to the end of the link list I sent you, buddy, and talk about a little thing we have up at HotHardware.com, which we hope in the coming days you folks will get in on and contribute to. We want you a part of this. Certainly, you can fire off some stuff here on YouTube and hashtag it appropriately. But Intel is ready to talk GPUs. Get in on the conversation here. Discrete graphics, they're ready to talk about it, share a little bit of their vision and strategy for this product segment and the highly competitive discrete graphics space between incumbents like NVIDIA and AMD. They have a tall order to try and break in there. Marco, you and I pulled this story together with the folks at Intel. It's going to be fascinating to see what the community comes back with and what Intel comes back with. What are your thoughts about this, that they're actually so early on willing to say anything? It's like, 2020 is when they've sort of put a stake in the sand. Here's when we're going to have product, or when we plan to have product, but they're willing to talk a little bit now.
Yeah, it's good news, especially for us, since we have the exclusive on it for now. So yeah, we're lucky enough to engage with Intel on this, and we are going to have we're sending over a bunch of questions, and we're hoping that the community also provides, an array of questions that they want answered directly from Intel. Now, obviously, we can't expect them to give us speeds and feeds and model numbers and, specific product information. But if you're curious how Intel plans to enter this GPU market that's, now dominated by NVIDIA and AMD, and where, years ago there were 10 players, and now there's really just the 3. With Intel is a huge GPU player, by the way, but in the integrated space, obviously, they push tons of pixels, but no discrete cards. So yeah, if you're curious how Intel plans to pull this off, please go to this post, put them in the comment thread. Comment here, use the proper hashtag #AskIntelGPU, because we're gonna kind of compile the best questions and hope to get some really good answers from Intel and shed some light on the company's plans and really what they expect to pull off in the GPU space.
I just tossed a link in the chat so folks can see that. Hop right in there and check it out. This is for real. They want to have a discussion. They were very specific about engaging the community, and I think that's admirable of them early on in this stage. They sort of put themselves out there. There's a bit of a risk there that you run if you're not willing to disclose too much, and so but they're willing to walk that line and at least have a conversation. And I think that's important. I think they understand that's important for this product category specifically. There's a big community behind it. So kudos to them. Chris, what are your thoughts, and maybe even an initial question in your mind that might be floating around?
I mean, it is really early, and it's a couple years off still. So, there's a lot we can even see the GPU space develop further. I mean, we saw ray tracing come in with NVIDIA now. So, they are going to need probably more than just raw performance to compete. They're probably going to need some exclusive feature. Not that I like exclusive features, but some way that they can lead the charge in to make a dent. So I want to see what they're going to do with that.
Don't say anything yet. Don't say anything yet.
No, I'm not.
All right.
I know nothing.
Ye have little faith, Marco. No, what I was going to say is what I want to do is maybe prompt some folks who perhaps aren't. I think it was John Sugar here in the chat said, I don't really have any specifics to ask Intel about. It's too early. The only thing that really matters is, are they competitive? that will help consumers. Good point. And the proof is in the pudding on the competitive side, right? I mean, we'll have to see the execution there, how the product competes and the price points associated with it. But think about things like process capabilities in manufacturing. Think about lots of different aspects of what it takes to make a very complex, probably the most complex, next to the CPU, complex subsystem in your PC, whether it be desktop, notebook, what have you. It is a massive piece of silicon. It takes up more silicon area, I think. I don't know if you could do it per dollar or if you did it in terms of performance impact, but it takes up more silicon area for a GPU than a CPU, because the CPU's got a lot of logic and GPU's got all kinds of memory going on, and it's a beast. Well, I mean, Marco, this could be a fascinating discussion, even in this early stage, right?
Yeah, well, it takes a long time to develop a GPU, so the design is done if they plan to launch in 2020, or at least they hope it's done if they plan to launch in 2020. So Intel knows what's going to hit the market is close to finalized at this point. Obviously they have to see how the first silicon responds and where clocks are going to be and all that kind of stuff. But the plan that's in place, it's not that it's rock solid because it's so early, and they have to be flexible as hardware comes back to them. But the spec is probably in their heads already. So we'll see how much information we get out of them and where they plan to sort of hit the market and what the overall goal is going to be. Obviously, you can't have a lineup that's going to tackle everything from a $50 GeForce to a $2,000 GeForce out of the gate, but we'll see what happens, over time.
Yeah. Francois chimes in. They still have the best high performance transistor. The trade-off will be critical between transistor power voltage and dice size or die size. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was referring to, is if they can, it's really a major league departure from the types of VLSI, very large scale integrated IC design they've done in their fab process. It's a pretty good stretch, but they've obviously done, as you noted, Marco, they've obviously done the homework to say, yeah, we can make a go of this. This we can do. And so they've said this before, though, and so you wonder, but it was a different day, a different time. Things are always different, right?
Yeah. So just to address what Francois says, I don't disagree outright, but here's the wrinkle, right? We can't pretend Intel's not having problems with 10 nanometer, right? It was supposed to be 2016 or maybe 2015 when first 10 nanometer is supposed to come. If they continue having problems and they plan, and the plan is to completely develop and manufacture a GPU in-house, and they have to have a 14 nanometer GPU competing with 5 nanometer from TSMC, I don't know if you can say that they have the best transistor at that point. So I don't know. We'll see.
I think for them to come out and make a statement, and this is just speculation, and maybe they'll share some of this, and we can ask these questions. And you should ask these kind of questions, guys, in the community, folks. I think if they had a process issue they thought that would gate them in this decision, they already figured that out. It's my guess, but we might want to see if we can get an answer on that. What do you think? And I think they're probably going to give you a pretty positive answer, but it's all it's interesting stuff. It's speculation. And, that's the beauty of this, is we don't have to speculate. We can get at least some sort of response right from the horse's mouth. Chris, anything else to add in there? I hear you humming and hawing in the back there.
Oh, not really, but John Sugar again in the chat saying, with his tinfoil hat on, he's wondering if Intel is going to pull in Intel and make their GPUs more compatible with future chipsets, such as the Z570 or whatever comes out at that era, and processors, as they'll have control of all three at that point. And so I guess we could also ask, is there much they can do that wouldn't also be exposed to the other GPU manufacturers? What kind of magic could they throw in there?
I think that's a stretch. I think it would be broad market suicide to make
And
it.
I would tend to agree with that.
To make it restrictive. But Marco, I know I hear you over there. You're itching to get in.
Yeah. So to answer John, I don't think they would do anything like that. It doesn't make sense to do that. They want to have a product that everybody wants. Now, I mean, I guess they could technically do something to the chipset, maybe, you know, more bandwidth between the GPU and the chipset and the CPU, but I don't think that would do anything. Now, interesting what Francois just said. He says, if I was them, I'd go on 14 nanometer.
Yeah, it's a workhorse.
That would basically, so that statement basically would relegate them to the mid-range out of the gate. There's no way.
Maybe.
Yeah, you know, so I'm not sure. Well, actually, since Francois just said, since they're not going for the win at the beginning, maybe he knows something we don't know. I don't know.
There's a lot you can do in silicon with respect to architecture efficiency. And I mean, I'm not saying that NVIDIA and AMD haven't figured this out in 14 nanometer. They certainly have. I mean, God knows they've been doing it for years. They've wrung it out a lot longer than Intel has at this point. But I don't know. You know, I mean, it's interesting. It could be a fun time to watch. What are you thinking, Chris? I hear you over there.
Oh, that mid-range isn't necessarily a problem because that's where the bulk of the buyers are, but that's also where the razor-thin margins are. And so if you're pushing into a space where that's already kind of AMD's turf right now, is that mid-range value proposition GPU, you know, that's going to make it even thinner of a profit margin to be competitive. So it'll be interesting if that's the route they go. Of course, we have a lot to wait and see on.
There are a lot of wrinkles and nuances to this discussion. I think Francois may have hit the nail on the head. And it's a fascinating thing to think about. Actually, if you think about it, NVIDIA and AMD are both fabless semiconductor companies. They design chips. They don't build them. TSMC does. Global Foundries does. Whoever for AMD and NVIDIA. Intel would have an in-house 14 nanometer fab that they would be very efficient on from a cost standpoint. That's a cool dynamic for the mid-range, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's a $200 graphics card. Performs kind of like your $400 graphics card.
And that also, that sort of connects to exactly this conversation we're about to have to them. When AMD launched Polaris in the beginning, it was, you know, there was speculation it was going to be, you know, faster than 1080 and a high-end chip. Right. That obviously didn't happen. But when AMD actually engaged and started talking about it, they were forthright and they were upfront that they were going for share in the $200 space. And they launched a card that, you know, it was more power hungry than other $200 cards, but they launched exactly what they said. A VR capable $200 GPU for the masses with bleeding edge feature set. And they were honest and straightforward. And AMD's fans, they appreciated that and they cultivated that audience. We'll see how this all plays out. And Intel does have the former AMD dream team over there doing marketing, so we'll see.
Wouldn't that be an interesting thing, right? You've got AMD sort of, you know, waving the value flag right now with Ryzen and Threadripper and just, oh man, you know, look at our price performance value. If Intel could come out and do that with GPUs, right? Wagging the tail wagging the dog or something like that. I don't know.
So all of Francois' comments, I feel like we could spend an hour just on this. I feel like I want Francois to call in. Francois, do you have a webcam set up?
Oh, he'd run the show though. That's the problem. We wouldn't get another reward in Edgewise.
What do you mean? I got a true out of him. He agreed with me. 5:58 time stamped. I could screenshot it.
You should frame it, put it on your wall behind you.
Funny stuff.
I have an Intel quote on the wall behind me.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, absolutely. From the Wall Street Journal, no less.
And Financial Times.
There you go. Back in the day, they quoted HotHardware. Yeah, they heard it first with us, so they quoted us. Good stuff. All right. Well, should we move on? We should probably move on. Okay,
Yep.
let's move on just because, you know, we can't talk this all night long, although we easily could. We want to leave this to a discussion in at Hot Hardware, certainly in the comments section. We sent you that. We linked it here in the comments section and YouTube in the chat. Hit that link, jump into hothardware.com, or if you're on social media, certainly Twitter with that hashtag #AskIntelGPU. Hashtag #AskIntelGPU. And I think you can do that on Facebook too, and it all rolls up. And we're gonna pull those feeds. We're gonna pull those questions. We're gonna consolidate the best ones. Can't do them all, obviously. Consolidate the best ones and try and have a discussion with Intel. It's a beautiful thing. Gotta love how connected we all are in this great day and age of the internet. So let's move on to AMD news. Lots of AMD news, from Radeon's to Zen 2 to Radeon Instinct, based on 7-nanometer GPU technology that you talked about, Marco. But let's talk about something that's here and now, and then we'll briefly talk about the futures before we move on. Let's talk about the Radeon RX 590 from AMD, just released 12-nanometer Polaris nanometer. What do you know, Marco?
We know everything, and so do most of the people watching, probably, because technically the chip is the same as the one in the 580 and the 480. So let me hold up a couple cards. This is the beautiful Power Color Red Devil. There's that guy. That's a good looking card. Big, thick, fatty. And speaking of fatties, here is the XFX Fat Boy, Radeon RX 590 Fat Boy.
I love that name. That's a great name.
Yeah, it's so funny. So essentially what the RX 590 is, now they're saying 12 nanometer manufacturing process. Technically, you can make an argument it's the same as the 14 nanometer process. It's just more matured. And once they kind of dug into it, they said, we've got some tweaks, and it's better power and frequency characteristics. We can call it 12 nanometer. The die size and the transistor count's all the same, actually, but the chip does behave differently. So what you're looking at is a 2304 stream processor GPU, 8 gigs of memory connected through a 256-bit interface, just like the RX 580. But how this differs is much higher GPU clocks, whereas the 580 boosted to about 1340 megahertz. The reference spec is 1545, and like the XFX card was 1600. The Power Color card was just behind it. I think it was 1576. So much higher clocks. And if you go look at power, it was slightly higher power, but not a lot to get those clocks out of it. So in the end, what it ends up being is about 5 to 12% faster than RX. Oh, excuse me. I'm choking.
Careful.
I think I just swallowed a bug. No, I literally think I just swallowed a bug.
This is great. We could watch Marco writhe in pain here.
And I have nothing to drink.
All right, which company's sending an assassin drone?
Wait, Chris. Wait, let's take this opportunity, Chris. We need to rub it in now. What are you drinking? I've got a nice Samuel Adams IPA.
See, I'm drinking coffee.
Oh,
holy crap! That was so funny.
You need my beer. I can't hand it to you though.
I've got Allagash White down there. I'll probably grab after the stream, but I was dragging.
You okay now? You back with us?
I'm as close to okay as I'm going to be for a minute. So basically, you end up with a mainstream card faster than a 1060, obviously faster than 1080, hovering around the $279 price point.
Yeah. No, it's a interesting product for sure. And it does hit that sweet spot in the market of the what is it, 200 and sub $300 graphics card. Yeah. So yeah, well under $300. So there's a lot of value in that. I mean, I'll be honest, when I first started out, years and years ago, when heck, the internet was stringing a tin cup. The notion of a $200 graphics card, it was important. Like I would never have thought to spend $600 on a graphics card. Back then prices were different and things have scaled, immensely more powerful, but still there's a huge percentage of the market that's $300 or less, that's all I got budget for my PC. I might want the latest and greatest for $300 or less. And so this comes at a good time. I mean, it is a refresh, but it's a die shrink and an optimization for cost and efficiency. And good bang for the buck. I think, what's ironic, Francois mentioned something about the mining boom, the crypto miners going bust. They would love this card these days, probably, right?
Yeah, the 480 and 580 were great. This would probably be even more tweakable and nice. Now, speaking of pricing though, and budgeting, yeah, if you really can't spend more than 300 on a GPU, it's arguably the best one to buy right now in terms of performance. It is higher power than a GeForce. Cards were a little louder than a GeForce's, but in terms of performance, great compatibility with all the APIs, yada yada. But if you got another 60 or so bucks, 60, 70 bucks to spend on a GPU, there is a ton more performance to be had by something like a Radeon Vega 56 or a GTX 1070. Yeah. So, everybody's budget constrained. So I'm just saying, if you can budget that extra $60, it's worth going for the higher end card. But yeah, killer sub $300 card.
So Marco,
interesting to look at the power numbers on it. Go ahead, Chris. What was your question?
What do you make of the argument that this can crossfire versus a 1060 that has no SLI? Do you think that's a compelling argument to go with this over the 1060 if they're competitive on performance and price? Or
not for me. No, like I don't. I feel that the extra money spent is always better to go with the faster single card. So if you're going to spend, $700 total for two of these and deal with the compatibility issues and the software issues with multiple GPUs, I think the experience, and the micro stutter, things like that, the experience will be better putting that $700 towards a faster single GPU.
And do you think anyone's buying one card now and adding a second down the road, or do you think at that point they're probably just buying one whole new card?
I think some people do that, but far fewer than you'd expect. I personally do know some people that have done it with this class of card, but yeah, I don't think that that's a huge consideration.
Yeah, that's another one of those statistics you wish you just had that you could just pluck out of the air, because it is an interesting thought. I mean, the thing that's great about PCs, modern PCs these days, is how modular and upgradable they are. You're not locked into whatever your horsepower is today. You can upgrade down the line, and if you know what you're doing, and that's the DIY, the whole DIY culture. So it runs sort of against that, to say, hey, I can't pop another card in later and get near 2x the performance. But I think you might be right, Marco. I think there's maybe a smaller percentage that actually do that don't just say, you know what, I'm going to bite the bullet another year from now instead of 6 months and get a much better card. I don't know. I don't know what the attach rate is. And actually, I wonder if NVIDIA's decisions to remove SLI and NVLink in the case of the RTX series, the 2070, for example, to remove that, they said, the attach rate in the lower end, the mid range and the lower end just isn't there. So it kind of validates at least that theory.
And lots of the newer games, DX12 specifically coded for multi GPU support. So there's just so many potential pitfalls. I would just rather not worry about it. And if you had the budget, go with the higher end single card.
Yeah. And Francois brings in another point, says if people stop thinking NVIDIA versus AMD, they'd see that these cards are great values, which I agree to a point. But then you add in other technologies like FreeSync versus G-Sync on your monitor, which you may or may not have. And if you do have one or the other, that's still unfortunately going to push you probably down that same track, because variable refresh rate is too nice to just kind of throw away because you've saved a few bucks on the other team.
Yeah. That whole thing's gotta, we could talk more on that, but that whole thing's gotta shake out too. I'm sorry. We don't need two ways of doing it, two standards.
No, we don't.
It's silly. Marco, you got any thoughts before we move on that?
No, I think we're good. We're running out of time, and we got a lot to cover, so we should probably boogie.
We do. We should probably boogie. Let's move on. Do we want to talk real quickly AMD's significant 7 nanometer announcements, both Zen 2 for next generation EPYC processors and Zen 3 for 2020 on the roadmap now. But in 7 nanometer, that's the kicker there. And then Radeon Instinct, the first 7 nanometer GPU to hit the market for the workstation and machine learning crowd. What do you think about those, Marco? And we can round table these a little bit.
Yeah, so EPYC looks crazy. It's different, similar but different architecture. If you look at the little first of all, double the cores, insane. Double the cores, but basically quadruple the FPU performance due to architectural changes. There's not a lot of detail on architecture that we can share or that AMD has shared, but they've also sort of changed how the memory attaches. So those memory issues we're talking about with Threadripper, where memory is not attached to certain dies. What they did with the next gen EPYC is the memory and IO attached to a 14 nanometer chip, that big die in the center, if we end up showing it on the video, and then all of the chiplets, which what they're calling them on the outside,
right?
They're all 8 core dies, kind of that connect through that IO controller in the center.
CPU logic.
So yeah, you end up. Now we couldn't get details. I was probing to try to get this information. What you end up with is one fewer hop if a workload had to bounce from one CCX to one in a different die, then back out to memory, because now everything just goes through the center. But technically, you should have worse latency versus a die that was already attached to memory, because now everything goes through this IO. But apparently there were changes to Infinity Fabric and clocks, and there's just a lot we don't know to say now. In terms of what was disclosed for a drop-in replacement, that essentially, it's going to work on the same platform. There is a new platform coming if you want PCI Express 4.0 compatibility, but you can drop this into existing EPYC platforms and quadruple the performance if your workload is FPU heavy. That's insane. Like, that doesn't happen. So in that regard, it's huge news, and hopefully it helps AMD sort of gain some share in the enterprise.
Yeah, it is really an amazing achievement at this point. TSMC is their fab partner, I believe, on this. That's producing the 7 nanometer technology, and I think the other thing that's interesting about AMD as well in this regard is that they've always had a very strong core IP portfolio with respect to serial interconnect and Infinity Fabric and switching, serial switching. That's really sort of always been one of their special sauces, if you will. They've got a great CPU core that's very modular and scalable now with Zen. And when you couple that with their IP, their knowledge, their years of doing it. I mean, they were doing it since Hypertransport and way back in the day. Really good with that stuff. So where they say, Marco, and where you pointed out, historically, hops through, the switch to the CCXs, through Infinity Fabric to the CCXs, adds latency. But you wonder how much they can hide in a next generation Infinity Fabric with this design, with the chiplet design. You would think they wouldn't have made matters worse. They would have.
The answer, the specific answer, the closest thing to an answer I got was, it's a good story. Somebody said so. That's the closest thing to an answer I got.
Better than a bad story, I suppose.
Yeah,
Chris, what do you think about this? Would you be jonesing for a 64 core server CPU?
I'm just trying to think of what I could even throw at it. I mean, even looking at the 16 core Threadripper, what we first saw was hard enough to beat with the workloads we were throwing at that. Then you got the 18 core Intel, the 32 core Threadripper 2, now going up to 64 cores. Like, you've got to have some serious abuse planned for that chip. And I know there's people out there for it. I just don't have that much of a need. myself, as beautiful as it looks.
Yeah, no, it's
16
beautiful.
quad-core VMs, baby.
That's what it is. It's a cloud play, and that's what's exciting. I think if you're watching the stock tickers and you're watching the competitive landscape from a market share standpoint, and from whether it be Lisa Su's leadership, turning the company around and getting them profitable, where can they make a dent? Where's the bread and butter? High margin revenue. It's in the cloud. It is the data center. That's where Intel makes their bucks. It's always been their cash cow. And so, yeah, if they can somehow, with this leapfrog, when Intel admittedly, stutter stepping with 10 nanometer and get that kind of scalability without the latency, I mean, holy crap, could really be an interesting platform. And certainly AMD has already announced AWS is tapped into it with Amazon, with their Amazon Web Services cloud platform. So, just a cool time in the market, and competition is good, and it keeps everybody honest and everybody cranking hard to put out good stuff, right?
Yeah. So Francois has got an interesting comment, and this is speculation, right? So he said, based on the die size in the center, they have a massive cache there in that IO chip. No, it wasn't confirmed, but there was, the talk was a big L4 cache in there.
Good catch.
There was also talk that chip can basically be sliced up in half or quads for different versions of Threadrippers. Obviously you can have the little tiny chiplet is an 8-core Zen 2. So you can have 8-core desktop chips with that little tiny die and basically scale up or down as much as you want, and still only have that one hop out to memory. So yeah, it was all rumored and nothing confirmed, but yeah, a lot of cache and scalability in that IO chip, apparently. Rumor has it. I shouldn't say apparently.
With the size of that board he's holding with the chip and all this, how long until AMD has created a CPU, whatever you want to call it, so large that you just need to strap the PCI slots and everything else directly on the same board because there's no space left for anything else?
I mean, that's the same size as the previous gen. It's no bigger. There's more silicon on the spreader, but
maybe it's the angle there.
That's the idea. That's the approach. Hang the IO as close to the CPU complex as you can get it with the least amount of hops and latency, and you improve performance dramatically. Dang it, it's so cool. The integrated circuit architecture in general, and these massively complex CPUs. Excuse me, I've got the humbug now, and I wish I went to engineering school so that I could design some of this stuff, because it's really cool, right? My son.
I wish I didn't have a mortgage so I could just play with it all the time.
There you go. Well, all right. Let's move on real quickly, and we'll touch base that AMD is also first in 7 nanometer with the GPU with Radeon Instinct MI60. Marco, we'll just touch on this real quick. We don't know a lot about it. PCI Express 4.0 interconnect on board for next generation attachment to PCI Express 4 compatible platforms. What do we think about this and the possibility of it trickling down to the consumer, and when kind of thing? And I don't know, just some quick thoughts.
So quick thoughts, super fast for the space it's designed for. 14.7 teraflops of FP32, 7.4 teraflops FP64. So it's basically the Vega architecture that we know, shrunk down to 7 nanometer with the faster PCI Express interface with the HBM attached. Now, based on all the information they talked about, it seems like it would make an awesome upgrade to existing Vegas. I don't think this particular setup will end up in the consumer space because the cost is very high for the HBM that they're using. So I think for now we'll have to wait to hear what's coming with Navi next gen, AMD's next mainstream GPU. I don't think, considering how much money could be made with these enterprise GPUs, I think this particular chip's going to stay there for at least a time.
I also think, and I think that's an astute observation. I think 7 nanometer currently right now is probably expensive or more expensive, certainly, than Workhorse 12 or 14 or perhaps even Intel's 10, whatever. And so, yeah, you need to go for the high margin business that makes a business case that makes sense with that leading edge process technology, that you can recoup your ROI on. So in silicon, which is precious stuff. Right, Chris?
Of course. It's all about money.
I just seen if you're awake, buddy. It's okay. All right. So I'm going to move on real quick, and then we should probably wrap up on a couple of quick tablets before we close here. We've only got a few minutes. I took a look at the Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Extreme, which I did a review on earlier this month, and I found it to be, I don't know if you can swing back down on that, John, but here's the machine here, and I'm powering it up now. It is a 15-inch version of the ThinkPad X1 Carbon, basically. I had the 4K panel, and it is, but if you think about the X1 Carbon and you just enlarge it to a 15.6-inch display footprint, it is that machine with one key exception. It has a discrete GPU on board. So now your ThinkPad X1 Carbon, all that, flat, black, sleek, great keyboard, ThinkPad keyboard. Love the ThinkPad keyboards. I run a ThinkPad as a daily driver. The X1 Carbon actually 14-inch, excuse me. Just because I love that keyboard so much. But the display is great. It's an HDR 4K display, discrete GPU on board now to go with Intel 8th generation, up to 6-core CPU if you'd like it. But GeForce GTX 1050 Ti on board. Max Q design, Max Q as well. So we ran it through its paces. It actually turned out to perform really well, just a hair over 4 pounds. So although it's a larger machine, it's certainly not a heavier machine, 4.06 pounds to be exact. And it is really just an impressive device. We found that although it's thin and light, that extra area, that 15-inch area, allowed it to minimize throttling. So we ran Cinebench on it. We've got the 6-core 8th generation Core i9 on board, and that thing, over multiple extended repeat workloads of Cinebench, I think it bled off 5% or less of its performance. So thermal saturation, not much of an issue. Gaming, didn't look at thermal saturation as much there, but again, even while gaming, its fan profile was quiet enough. It wasn't annoying. Just everything about it seemed like a balanced, powerful 15-inch machine. The only thing it struggled on a little bit was battery life. There is I think it's 80 watt-hour battery on board, so it's a pretty stout battery. That 4K HDR display eats power. It still came in middle of the pack. It wasn't dead last. It was sort of in that lower echelon. We had to run some extended testing on it because there was some variability there that we found out playing with Windows Power Manager and battery life slider that it actually could offer up a few more minutes. So respectable, but when you talk about a 4K panel and a 15-inch 4-pound machine, it's a lot to power. So if you want to get battery life with it too, go for the 1080p display. I don't think there's a 1440p SKU, unfortunately. That would have been a great half step down display wise. Sort of a nice balance, but great machine. If you are the type that needs to, get some work done, have some serious GPU power for content creation, or of course, gaming. Great machine. Loved it. Good stuff. Chris, you'd probably be all over something like this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I still like the Ultrabooks, so the smaller form factors for it. But if I need a machine that's going to do both my work and, on the go, then definitely a fantastic option. I also don't really like 4K panels in laptops, whether they're 15 or 13 or whatever size. It just isn't practical. I'd much rather see a 1440p panel in there as a high resolution option.
Yeah,
you're not getting a lot of advantage out of the 4K when it's that small, unless you're like right up on the screen for some reason.
Yeah. And then Marco, this is probably a little bit too big for you, right? This guy, it's not your flavor of laptop.
Yes, sir. I like them. I like some tiny.
There you go. There you go. Well, then let's talk about something else. Let's move along. Check that out at Hot Hardware. Great machine to check out if that's your form factor and you like the ThinkPad Jam, as it were. HP's Envy X2. Marco, I know you've played around with a few HP machines lately, but this is a always connected PC powered by Intel. Now, we heard that sort of catchphrase. I don't know if it was coined by Qualcomm, but this one is powered by an Intel Core i5 Y series processor, so 4.5 watt. Interesting device. What do you think about that? That's a little bit more your jam.
So yeah, this was an article that kind of fell in our laps at the perfect time. We had Rod write this piece. Rod was on a 5,000-mile road trip when we had the opportunity to look at an always connected PC, and I said, you know what, we should do this, and not as a straight up review. Let's talk about the experience of being always connected on the road. So we was like, yeah, Intel sent it to Rod, and he played with it for I think like a few weeks, and yeah, it's interesting. So Qualcomm, HP did launch those Qualcomm always connected PCs, and they kind of, they were premium looking machines, but kind of got dinged a little bit for the performance running, basically x86 apps under emulation. That's not Qualcomm's fault. That's Microsoft for developing the platform, and Microsoft made the emulator. But that's neither here nor there. Intel's like, hey, we can make a really low power chip and get you all day connected as well. So that's what this machine is. It's still a 7th gen Core i5 7Y54 in it. Only 4 gigs of RAM, small 128 gig SSD. But you're talking, a sub 2 pound tiny machine that you could take anywhere that's always connected
put that
through
up?
LTE.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So turns out, performance is obviously not going to be killer. Low power chip, doesn't boost very high, not a lot of memory. It's a mid-range performance offering. And in terms of battery life, with always on, where the screen never shut off running our custom battery test, it was in the upper echelon, but I think it was sub 8 hours in that test. But in real world use, where Rod was on the road, firing up the web, checking email, using it at night when he wasn't driving and was trying to relax, he'd sometimes go, almost 3 days without having to charge the thing. And the LTE, we were on the Verizon network, just worked. He's like, sometimes it was better than the free Wi-Fi being offered at some of the parks where you park a motorhome on the road. So yeah, he really liked it. I think HP does a good job with the design of these small machines. They're trying to innovate with their, with the kickstands and the setup. So cool little machine. The only thing is there's the extra cost involved, obviously, to have the LTE connectivity. It's like having another cell account. But I mean, if you need it, I think these are really cool little devices.
Boy, I tell you, when you think about how crappy even hotel Wi-Fi can be sometimes, right? When you hop into that swank hotel and it's packed and they book every room and everybody's tapping on the Wi-Fi, and you're up, in the air, and high on a high floor or whatever, and God knows the cell service is probably pretty darn good. You talk about that and what it means in a laptop, a nice LTE connection. Heck, half the time when we go to Las Vegas for CES, Marco, we're tethering to our phones, right? Because the Wi-Fi sucks so bad. So I think it's undersold in laptops, and it's kind of like a natural, the ecosystem needs to figure this out cleaner. So it just should be there. Like if you don't have Wi-Fi, I mean, we're all going Y-gig anyway someday or something like that, right?
Well, I mean, I think this time next year we're going to be talking about 5G always connected machines, and that's going to be tons of bandwidth, lower latency, hopefully newer chips that are lower power and better battery life. So it's going to be a different landscape in this space in a year.
Right. Well, I think we're running out of room here. We'll have to get to the Galaxy Tab S4 and the next one from Samsung. We'll talk about that on the next cast. But we'll wrap this up, and we'll just ask again, folks, swing on by HotHardware.com. I tossed a link in. I will do it again right now to join us in a conversation with Intel. And they're ready to talk GPUs, discrete graphics, and their strategy and vision for it. There you go, in the chat. Hit that link and join us at HotHardware.com. where you can find us on the web, youtube.com/HotHardware or Hot Hardware Vids. Please thumb up, subscribe if you like this cast. We appreciate it. And twitter.com/HotHardware. Hashtag ask Intel GPU. That's the hashtag for your questions. Yeah. Did I cover it, guys?
I think so.
All right. Well, parting words, anybody in the holidays?
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Eat some turkey.
That's it, baby. Let's eat some turkey. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thanks for stopping by. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your families.